Absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day, going to be making my all-important picks and predictions for the biggest games of the weekend. A lot of divisional rivalries, just a lot of intriguing heavyweight matchups as well. But these four games could be season-defining for certain teams. Maybe in different manners, but all together, all four of them mean something, at the very least to me, when I look at this weekend slate of games. Because of the fact all of these teams have a shot at pulling off wins. And so, that's the point that I'm trying to make here. I want to make this segment as fair as possible, but I also want to highlight games that might go under the radar outside of potentially the top games you might be monitoring this weekend as well. So without further ado, let's start off with kind of one of the more under the radar games of the weekend, maybe more for external issues for at least one of these teams rather than on the field play. But the Jets and the Dolphins is just a game that I'm really intrigued by. Dolphins 6.5 point favorites, but I feel like with all the off the field issues, you could justify this spread being a bit higher for the Dolphins. However, I'm going to say that this divisional matchup is one that could go either way. And I feel kind of funny saying that just because the Dolphins feel like the better team right now, and they're definitely playing more cohesively. But the Jets are one of those teams that I feel like can find moments in games where their offense becomes unplayable. In certain situations, say the run game, the short passing game perhaps, I see glimpses of what this offense could have been this season, and it's just a matter of sustaining it, and against a divisional opponent, that could be the impetus for this offense to really get going. And so, seeing as to how, like I said, divisional games are always tricky, and I always say that, the Jets could cover here. I'm going to pick them to cover here. I'm going to pick them to cover the spread, not necessarily convincingly, because I still do believe the Dolphins have more juice to their attack, they're more fluid, and they have more opportunities to put up points in bunches with that offense. But I gotta give the Jets at least a chance here, because when they play well on the offense side of the football, I like what I see. And while it's few and far between, and Aaron Rodgers looks like his 40-year-old self, and they're not necessarily getting Breece Hall the ball as much, and he's missing open receivers, when those things get compensated for, and when everything does click, and you can sustain certain drives, you can put points on the board, most importantly, sometimes win the time of possession or field position battle like they did against Seattle, then you can cover a spread. Maybe not win outright, but you can keep a game close. And divisional games are always close. So it's a tough one to pick here, but I think the Jets will cover, just because of the fact that there's a chance that we can see some good moments from them, even if it's only in spots and spurts. But then let's talk about the Sunday Night Football game. We're going to talk about it a little bit more at length for our final segment. Chargers-Chiefs here. Always going to be an intriguing one. And this one's going to come down to the play of the Chargers offense without, like I said, J.K. Dobbins at its helm. And I feel like, Justin Herbert's one of those guys who bought into this Harbaugh philosophy and might struggle a little bit and prove that he could struggle in the game against Atlanta without a solid foundation in his backfield. But he still is one of my favorite quarterbacks. Still is a competent quarterback who can lead an offense no matter what. He did it admirably under the Brandon Staley regime. And now, with Jim Harbaugh, it's going to be a lot tougher because he got so used to it. But he still has that shock element to him. And you still have to account for his dual threat abilities as well. And going against this Chiefs team that really isn't that special in any one metric. I know a lot of people are saying their defense is elite, and it still kind of is, but they're not necessarily dominant in any one phase of their game right now. They're kind of middling, and it is one of those games where you still want to favor them. They are, in fact, 3.5 point favorites according to Vegas. I feel like the Chargers could cover here. It's going to come down, yes, to their defensive play, because I don't necessarily feel the offense will have enough to put up points consistently on the board. But if they win the field position battle, if the Chargers force turnovers early and often, then they can keep themselves in this one. It could be a tighter game than a lot of people think in a defensive standpoint, but I do think I like the Chargers covering here. I still think the Chiefs win, and I'm a little bit apprehensive to say that, but it does feel like there's going to be some quote-unquote changing of the guard moments there, like I alluded to when I opened today's show in this matchup, just because I do believe the Chargers are sneaking up on the Chiefs in terms of AFC West supremacy. And we could see elements of that, but not completely, just because you know that J.K. Dobbins' injury was pretty rattling to them in this game. So I'm going to pick the Chargers to cover, but not to win, unfortunately. Now let's talk about another one of the games of the week. Potentially number 2 in my mind in terms of games of the week, right behind Packers-Lions, just because it's an intra-conference game. And one of these teams hasn't been consistent enough for me to say they can spring the upset. It's Bills-Rams. Bills 4.5 points favorites here. And as much as I want to like this Rams team, as much as both sides of the football can be the scariest in the entire National Football League, the offense and the defense, once they're hot, they're hot. I still think the Bills are the better team here, the more experienced team, and most importantly, the most comfortable team right now. I feel like there's a certain comfort level there with the Bills and what they're able to do and how effectively they can do it, because they can play in so many different styles. They are so physical, yet so explosive that you can't really slow them down in any one aspect of their game. They're always on their game, and they're always going to want to attack you, whether in one way or another. And so I don't necessarily feel like this Rams team, who still doesn't necessarily have a true identity yet, is going to fare well in this one. I do think the Bills will win this one outright, and I do think they can win this one by more than, say, 10 points. Just because, as much as I respect what the Rams can be, I don't know what they will be any given week. And that's something that I don't want to say, and I don't often say about teams that are still very much in the playoff picture, but have a lot of work to do. And so that's why the Bills in this matchup, to me, really are standing out. And I do think that in terms of how this game could play out, the Rams will earn a lot of people's respect. They will prove that they can still hang tough with the league's elite. Because at the end of the day, the Rams still have that feel, that mold of the playoff team last year. And so I feel like there will be moments in this game where we see glimpses of what the Rams can be potentially over a 60-minute football game, but unfortunately it's only going to be for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So it's not going to be anything too comprehensive we see out of the Rams. I am giving them the benefit of the doubt, but the Bills right now are just a better team playing the better football. And so that's why the Bills, yes, it's cliche to pick them, but I do think that you have to at this point in time, just because the Rams right now are a little bit too scattershot. And the last game they want to talk about, let's go back 2 weeks. Well, not really, because they're playing again this weekend. It's the Browns and the Steelers. Steelers 6.5 point favorites here. But you know what I think about this game. And while it's tough to justify it, I just feel like the Browns are motivated to spoil their division. Yes, you know, in some games they fail to show up in certain aspects, and as a result, they falter when they should potentially have won, much like they did against Denver. But against the AFC North, there's something about this team that comes alive. They're truly spirited and motivated to derail the hopes of their divisional rivals more than any other teams in the NFL. And while it's certainly not the best plan for your own team's development, it certainly is fun to watch. I love the Browns, an exciting spoiler team. They went from one of the more unlikable teams in the National Football League to one of the most likable teams. And while this isn't about likability, there are certain factors here that really makes me think that that could play a big part of it too, because at this point in time, anything could go wrong for any team in the AFC at any point. And the Steelers feel like they're one of the more vulnerable elite teams, right? Because while, this offense can get going anytime, as they did last week against Cincinnati, we know what this defense can do. Chances are, in this matchup, yet again, we're not going to see the best of it. And I feel like it's going to be because the Browns just suck you into their game plan early. And Jameis does the best job of announcing himself early in games by saying, hey, I'm Jameis Winston and this is my game. I'm going to be aggressive and I'm going to throw the football deep on the field. And I don't know if the Steelers are going to be able to cope with that yet again, even though they saw it 2 weeks ago, albeit in more inclement conditions. But even now, this is going to be a very weird matchup. That's why I'm going to be picking the Browns against the spread. And this game could be close, but the way I see it, the Browns are explosive enough to really make this much like the last playoff game they played against each other. Remember that one where it would turn into a really weird shootout and there were so many turnovers, there were so many bizarre plays in that one. I could see this happening in this one. And this could definitely be like first one to like 45 points wins. And I think the Browns, if they get into that game style, could be the first one to 45. That's why I'm picking the Browns here, because they're just a fun team with an underdog mentality, never say die mentality now, that really can come to life against a divisional opponent and really make it difficult for them in this situation, just because of the fact that Jameis is unafraid. And that's sometimes all you need in a leader of your football team. If you're unafraid and if you're just willing to be free in how you play, then chances are your team plays relaxed as well and you can put up as many points as you want. But you also have to take your peaks with your valleys here. This could potentially be another one of those games where Jameis shoots himself in the foot a little bit, much like he did against Denver. But that's the excitement of this game, right? And so I have to pick, in the excitement, getting caught up in the hype of it, the team most likely to add to that excitement. Be the hype team in this matchup, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Let me know what you think about all these games in the comments below. They're all going to be very interesting heavyweight matchups. But coming up next, we're going to take a little look at the updated NFL MVP odds. I feel like this race is much more wide open than the Heisman, which makes it a lot more fun to analyze. So we'll be right back right after this short break.